Gentlemen, please, a little peace and quiet to begin. So, we'll conclude this discussion of the price determination today. In chapter 12 in your book, and the topic is price controls. Price controls. Administrative interventions by the government. The purpose of which is to keep the price level for a certain good different from the market price level. To keep it higher or lower than the market equilibrium level. We will see why governments do this, what are the proposed justifications for this, and what are intended and unintended consequences of this. And we will also explore the, let's say, the typology, the different types of price controls. So we can begin with the basic classification of price controls, and as we go along, you will see the differences between them and the similarities in some of the effects between them. We usually say that there are two different types of price controls. The first one could be called the minimum price guarantee. Minimum price guarantee. This is a type of price control when the government says you cannot charge lower price than this. Yes. For a certain good or a certain service, there is a government regulation on the book that says you are breaking the law if you charge price or if you exchange a good or service at the price which is lower than that.
What would be an example of that, like right now?
Are there any examples of that? Minimum price guarantee, sometimes called the price floors. You cannot go below floor. Anyone knows any examples of a price floor? It's very commonly discussed in our politics, in our economic profession.
Is gas like that, or?
Is gas like that? So how is gas priced?
How much their oil costs? There's taxes.
But is there how the gas prices are determined? Does the government determine the price of gas?
Sometimes the city can put a limit, right?
Yeah.
So one gas station can't undercut everybody else.
Mm-hmm. So they can say you cannot charge less than that. Okay. Sometimes, but it's not widely discussed type of price floor. One price is very often discussed, and it's very often. There is a huge debate about this price minimum. It's in the labor market.
Minimum wage.
Minimum wage. Yeah. Minimum wage is the classical case. Minimum wage regulation, minimum wage laws are a classical case. Minimum price guarantees or price floors. So whatever the market minimum wage is $10, and then the government passes a law saying you cannot hire anybody for less than $15. Okay, so that's one type of price controls. The second type of price controls, maybe even more widespread, is the maximum price guarantee. This is sometimes very often known as the price ceiling. Price ceiling, so it means you cannot go above a certain ceiling, above a certain level. You know any examples of price ceilings? So here, typically, with the price floors, the market rate, the market price would have been lower than the price that the government wants. The minimum wage. The reason why the minimum wage is passed is that government or politicians are not satisfied with how high the minimum wage is. They want to make it higher. Can't they pass a law saying like it be higher? With price ceilings, actually, people are not satisfied with how low the price is. They think it's too high. I say you can go only up to the ceiling and not farther than that. It's maximum price gap. You know any examples of price ceiling? There are many of them. They're not routinely applied in this country, but some of them are still applied, especially in big cities. New York is notorious or famous, depending how you look at the problem, for this type of price ceiling regulations. Chicago, Philadelphia. It's rent controls. Very common. Rent controls. So an apartment of certain description is $1,000, and the government, for a variety of reasons, says you cannot charge more than $700. That's the price ceiling. Okay, so that's a basic typology. You have price floors and price ceilings. These are the regulations of prices passed by the governments. Now, let us analyze the economic effects of these price controls. I said at the beginning that there are intended consequences of these measures and unintended consequences. And unintended consequences tend to be much tougher and much more problematic and much more difficult to deal with. And very often they are not foreseen, or even if they're foreseen, politicians very often do not take them into account when making decisions to pass the regulations. So in order to understand the effects of these measures, we have to go back to our analysis of market equilibrium, disequilibrium. So I will remind you, it's a basic idea of market equilibrium is the intersection of the supply and demand curves. This is your equilibrium market price. This is the equilibrium quantity on the market, where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Can you tell me what happens if a price of a good or a service is lower than the equilibrium level? What is the consequence of that? What we call that particular situation?
Is that a shortage?
Yeah, shortage. So this is a low price. The consequence of it will be that this quantity demanded here, quantity demanded one, will be higher than quantity supplied. So quantity demanded greater than quantity supplied, shortage. The opposite, if the price is higher, then you have the opposite. Quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. What is that called? Yeah, surplus. What about types of situations in a free market? They'll come back. So on a genuinely free market, when there is no regulatory or legal interference from the government, the prices will adjust. The quantities and prices will adjust, and the equilibrium will be reestablished, which means that the shortages and surpluses are transitory short-term phenomena on a genuinely free market. If there is a temporary shortage, what's going to happen? That the quantity demanded is greater, which means that suppliers are in a better negotiating position. They will extract concessions from the buyers in terms of higher prices. So the price of a good, whatever that good might be, doesn't matter. The principle is the same. Will start inching up. As the price goes up, quantity supplied, the quantity supplied will increase, and quantity demanded will decrease because of the basic laws of supply and demand. higher the price, lower demand, and higher the price, greater supply, more motivation for people to produce and sell. And vice versa, the same thing will happen if you have a surplus. The price will start going down because now the buyers are in a superior negotiating position vis-a-vis sellers. There are less buyers than sellers. Competition is stronger on the supply side, so they will have to offer concessions in terms of lower prices. If they want to sell their surpluses, they have to offer lower prices. As prices go down, sellers exit the market. Some of the higher cost, higher preference sellers exit the market, and new buyers enter. Because of lower price of a good, first law of demand, lower the price, higher the demand. Okay, so that's what happens on a genuinely free market. These types of adjustments are happening all the time. It's very difficult to avoid them and to keep the market in a disequilibrium for a very long period of time. That's a process of entrepreneurial arbitrage. Whenever somebody discovers that the price in some place is lower than or higher than the other place, entrepreneurs will be buying where it's cheaper and selling where it's more expensive. And by doing so, they will be equilibrating the two prices. Whenever it's cheaper, they will be buying, they will be reducing the supply of good. That place, by reducing the supply, they will be increasing the price. So the low price at one place will start increasing. On the other place where the price is too high, they will be supplying, they will be motivated to sell more because of higher price and higher revenue. By increasing the supply, what happens when you increase the supply? Demand is fixed. You increase the supply, the price goes down. So then this process of redistribution of goods from low price areas to high price areas will go on until the two prices equalize. So you will have a tendency for every one good in any given market to have just one price. That's sometimes called the law of one price. Okay. One more thing, just so you can call this a negative feedback mechanism. So what is a negative feedback? So you have something bad going on, something undesirable going on, and this bad thing kind of triggers some other process that works back on the initial caused by diminishing it, suppressing it. So this price divergence is an undesirable effect, market disequilibrium, but the price divergence triggers this fight among entrepreneurs to arbitrage away this difference, to buy where it's cheap and to sell where it's dear. And this process of market arbitrage then reduces the price spread between the two areas, leading to just one price. So we can call the market a stable system characterized by negative feedbacks, which means it's not easy to destroy the mechanism which has negative feedbacks. It's not easy to put it out of equilibrium forever, unless the government steps in and says we have a temporary shortage, and government says let it be forever, or government says we don't have a shortage, let's create it. So the best way to create and maintain a shortage forever is a maximum price guarantee. You have the price of apartments, which is affordable housing, which is $1,000. You impose $700 price, maximum price guarantee. You can bet that what's going to happen is a consequence of that the supply will shrink. Let's say that this is 1,000, this is 700 here. So what's going to happen here that the supply will shrink because people who find it profitable for them to rent apartments at $800 or or $900 or $950. All of them would be in the market and renting their apartments to tenants if the market price is $1,000. Because you are selling something on the market that is worth $900 to you for $1,000. There's a huge number of people whose minimum selling prices, minimum renting prices are between 700 and 1,000, who now will be out of the market. If you say you cannot charge more than 700, only people who can afford to rent at a lower price than 700, they will be in the market. With far fewer of them. Okay, so the demand, the supply of apartments will decrease from this quantity to this quantity, whereas the demand, what happens to the demand? The first law of demand, you make something cheaper, more people want to buy. So the demand will increase from this point here to this point here. So that's you will have this shortage here. And you cannot eliminate the shortage because in order to eliminate the shortage, you need the price to go up. But the government says you cannot increase price. If you do it, you are breaking the law. So you can now go to the black market and try to do it, but that's risky. And probably the price of apartments will be much higher than black market. So if we assume away the existence of black market, a shortage will result. So now you see the first order effect here. First order effect of a price ceiling will be shortage in the long run. And this shortage will affect exactly the kind of, exactly the group of people whom you wanted to protect. What is political justification for imposing rent controls? What do you think? Why politicians propose? I even saw in the Democratic Party platform that they want to reimpose rent controls in some big cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and so on. So it was out of fashion for a while, but it's coming back with vengeance every once in a while.
Maybe because all the people that don't make a lot of money, so they can afford housing.
People who don't make a lot of money, yeah, so that's a justification. Poor people cannot pay extraordinarily high prices of real estate in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and so on. So only this gentrification, you heard about that. That the cities become increasingly less and less diverse because only wealthy people can afford to buy or rent an apartment. So in order to maintain standard of living of poorer people or to maintain more demographically diverse structure of big cities, we need to make sure that people with lower incomes could afford to live in New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and so on. So that's a justification, that's a motivation, and many people are genuinely well-intentioned. They want to help poor people by passing these kinds of laws. You see, the effect here is exactly the opposite. Imagine that this is affordable housing market. Imagine that an average affordable housing unit in New York City costs $1,000. What you're going to end up doing is to reduce the supply of such apartments by a certain percentage and to increase the demand. So the supply of apartments will be lower. Less poor people, lower number of poor people will have affordable housing units for them than if you haven't imposed price regulation, price ceiling. But there is more to it. Imagine now that there are two types of real estate in every city. You have affordable housing. This is affordable. With an average price of $1,000 per unit. And you have luxury real estate. Let's say with an average price of $2,000. That's to simplify it. It's actually vastly more complicated, but let's just to illustrate what's going to happen here by this simple model. So now, a couple of questions for you. What is going to happen next to the supply? What is going to happen to the supply of apartments in the long run. Yeah, with the maximum still in place. Yeah, there will be less here. Why would there be less here if the maximum price controls remain in 10 years?
Well, anyone who wanted to pay for like $1,000 apartment now is paying for $700.
Yeah. How does that affect the demand for building new affordable housing units?
If you're gonna build, you can build the luxury ones.
Yeah, because if you intended to buy an affordable housing unit and rent it, you would be far less likely to do so now because you have to pay the full market price for the apartment, the market, and then you can charge only severely deflated price on the rent. So it doesn't make sense economically, it's unsustainable. So now imagine yourself in the shoes of a construction company. The demand in one part of the market goes this way, decreases, the price goes down, you shift workers and machinery and productive capacity to another segment of the market which is not controlled. So then you give a boost to the luxury real estate building, because there you can buy an apartment and you can earn money on it because the price of rents is not controlled by the government. So actually the second order effects of price ceilings is to punish in the long run additionally poor people whom you want to help and to subsidize the wealthy people. So that's what happened in New York, for example. New York had a terrible experience with the rent control experiment in 1940s, 50s, and 60s. The number of affordable housing units shrank dramatically in Manhattan and Bronx, Brooklyn. So while at the same time, one of the largest luxury real estate booms in human history happened. One of the main contributing reasons for that was that the luxury real estate was not price controlled, was controls. Why would you be imposing rent controls to help wealthy bankers and investors and hedge fund managers, whatnot? So paradoxically, by trying to help the poor people, you ended up punishing them and subsidizing the wealthy people. See how perverse consequences of something that you wanted to achieve and what you ended up doing eventually. And then the third order effect. So now, imagine yourself in the shoes of somebody who is really stubborn and say, I bought this apartment for real money. Now they don't allow me to charge $1,000. I cannot destroy the apartment. It's very difficult for me to repurpose it in something else. What can you do to get home, to financially survive? You cannot charge higher prices, but you can do some other things that will negatively affect, again, poor people who live in affordable housing. Reduce your costs for maintenance of apartments. So rent-controlled apartments are typically of much lower quality than the other ones because the landlords invest far less maintaining the good condition of the apartments. So then not only that the quantity of rent-controlled apartments will go down, their quality will plummet as well. Because the reduction in quality is the only way in which you can recover some of your costs that you're not allowed to recover by charging higher prices. Now you can punish your customers, your tenants, by not investing in proper maintenance of the apartment. So see, once you scratch the surface and start looking more deeply, you see how seemingly at the surface a very humane and very well-intentioned policy geared towards helping poor people ends up catastrophically harming. So it's unpopular to say this, because in spite, this is not like a rocket science. This is basic. There is no economist There are some things that are subject to great debate in economics. This is not one of them. This is just the basic stuff. Yet, in spite of all of this, the price controls and price ceilings are extremely popular, especially rent controls. Why is that the case? What do you think?
Short term? We're looking short term?
Yes, short-term effects. Politicians always look short-term, next elections, next week, next month. What else? Where are the votes? You know, people who are interested in these kinds of policies, they are more numerous than wealthy people. Why nobody? So then you have to cater to their interests, even if that's not paradoxical in their own interest. Then there is one more thing. Something that is called in economics the broken window fallacy. Sometimes harmful government policies tend to have immediate short-term positive effects for certain isolated groups and negative effects which are spread over a long period of time and are not immediately visible. So most of the costs of rent controls are long-term effects that are spread over a long period of time and many different groups in society. So it's not easy to see, to observe the cost of this policy at the time when it's promulgated or enacted. So politically, in spite of its economic unviability, this policy is very often, for political reasons, promoted. So there are other forms of price ceilings or other applications of price ceilings. You don't remember that probably, but the generation of your, I would say, grandparents probably very well remembers that in the 1970s. In this country, there are price ceilings, price controls. Gasoline, for example. There are shortages of gasoline in the United States in the 1970s. Anyone knows why, how that happened, and why? It's gasoline. So what happened in the 1970s that prompted was the price? Why that happened? At one point, I'll tell you one thing you might not believe, but check it out for yourself. At one point, President Richard Nixon, great Republican supporter of free markets, imposed general price and wage controls, price ceilings for all prices and all wages in the United States. Nobody could have increased wage for it. That lasted for a month or two, because you cannot get away with that in America. Why was that? The price ceilings on gasoline were part of the same mindset. In the 1970s, inflation started increasing like crazy because the government was ramping up government spending with the Vietnam War and with the welfare state in the 1960s, 1970s. So it was impossible to finance the exploding government spending only with taxes and borrowing, so government started printing money. Print money, inflation goes up. The prevailing orthodoxy at that time was that the only way to prevent inflation from happening, prices from increasing, was to administratively prohibit people from charging high prices on anything. That was the reason. As stupid as it might seem to us nowadays, that was the prevailing orthodoxy among economists. I say, you cannot charge prices, you sell gasoline at $5 or $1, whatever, so then we are safe from inflation. Of course, the consequence of that are the shortages, gas stations, shortages of gasoline. So typically in situations of economic crisis, typically in situations of high inflation, governments impose price ceilings on basic life necessities: bread, milk, cooking oil, gasoline. So I remember at one point in Serbia in the 1990s, we had the general price and wage controls for a very long time. I remember standing in lines for cooking oil and milk, multiple occasions. So the price is $1. The cost of production are $9. That is 5% of necessary quantity of cooking oil on the market. So when you hear that in some store there is a supply of cooking oil, like hundreds of people who flock there to get cheap oil, cheap cooking oil or milk or whatever, before it's gone, before it's sold out. Then, of course, you can buy it on the black market for 50, 60, 70% higher price, of course, and lower problematic quality as well. So that's the justification is always the same, to protect the standard of living of poor people. And the shortage is always the only and main consequence of that. Now, what governments can do to alleviate shortages from price ceilings? If you allow market prices to work, the price system works as a rationing mechanism. Rationing mechanism. It could be price or non-price. How does the price system ration consumption? If something is scarcer in higher demand, the price will increase. People with weaker preferences and lower incomes will reduce their purchases. So the pressure on that resource will be alleviated. Less of that good will be bought on the market. So the consumption will be limited. However, here you prevent that from happening. You don't allow price to increase. That's the entire point of price control, to prevent price from increasing. The only thing that you can do is a variety of things resembling this, lowering down the quality of apartments in New York City. So non-price rationing means, for example, waiting lines in Canadian healthcare system. Yes, you can get a free service or a very cheap service, but you cannot get it today. You can get it in 6 months or 6 weeks and so on. So delaying a service is one of the non-price rationing mechanisms. Delay. Or also, you can impose what is called a double currency system, essentially. Double currency, which means printing government coupons that everybody needs to have in order to buy a good which is under the system of pricing. So what does that mean? That means that you have only 5% necessary quantity of a good, 10% as compared to the demand at that price. Now, what you do, instead of allowing price to increase to reduce the demand, you print certain number of coupons that says this person can buy one bottle of cooking oil, and then spread it across the population. And then for anybody to buy a milk or cooking oil, you need to have two things. First, a requisite number of dollars, regular money, and government coupon. You cannot get from a regular store your milk or your bread without the coupons. So we used to live like that in 1980s, 1990s, very often. That was happening in the communist world. Double currency system there. Money and very scarce government coupons, without which you cannot obtain anything. So that's how you restrict them. You simply exclude everybody who doesn't have a government coupons, and 90% of people would not have 60%. Now you can imagine kind of corruption that is going on when trading in coupons. Whoever has somebody who is in charge or in somewhere in the structures of political power who is dealing with distributing these coupons. That's a very good opportunity for for corruption.
In that situation, what kind of control did the government have over the actual grocery stores or whatever where you had to use the coupons? Like,
Yes, they would sell the inspectors, and they would punish. They would close down the stores that don't use that. At that time, this was a government run. Most of the stores were government run stores, and even if they weren't, actually the government would crack down very strongly. So most of the so now you ask how you people survived black market. So most of the transactions were going on outside the market. For years, my father had a car. At that time, I'm not trying to remember. Even I was very young, but I had the driver's license for years. I don't remember ever going to a gas station. There was no gasoline at gas station. There were people. At that time, I could barely speak English, but I learned the term dealer. Dealer in our lingo was a guy who is exchanging worthless dinars, our currency, for Deutsche Marks, German marks, on the street, and the guy who was selling gasoline by the bottle, 1/3 of a gallon, 1 liter. So you go and buy, and the guy has a barrel, plastic barrel, with maybe 20, 30 gallons, and then you give him 1 or 2 Deutsche Marks, no dinars, accepted, and he would pour 1 or 2 or 3 liters of gasoline in your car. Then you would use all kinds of makeshifts to fill your gas tank, and then you drive, and then you buy another 2 or 3 or 4 liters. So that's how that worked. And the price was, of course, 10 times higher than the price on the gas station. And to make things even more perverse, the government was organizing this black market. The government, the chiefs of police and secret police and the ruling party, they were the bosses of the whole black market business, and they're scheming 60-70% of the profits of this. They organized themselves the network of black marketeers, and everything was sold like that. Cooking oil, we would buy cooking oil in a flea market. So you would buy hammers or old clothes or whatever, and then the guy is selling cooking oil. There's no cooking oil, sunflower oil. Most people use for cooking and stuff like that. So most of the economy goes on the black market. So double currency. Another story. How in 1980s, I don't remember this. I was very young at that time, but older, just slightly older generation than mine remembers this in 1980s in Yugoslavia. Gasoline, how ingenious communist governments are in controlling their people. Gasoline was under the regime of price ceilings, and of course there were shortages, and they discovered what is the cheapest way of rationing the limited supply of gasoline. So the registration plates at that time were like this. The first 2 letters signify the city. This is PG, it's Belgrade, capital city, and then you have a 6-digit, let's say 2699973. Now, if your registration plate number, if your first number is, let's say, an odd number, then you have a right to buy gasoline on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If your registration number begins with an even number, then you have a right to buy on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. That's how you reduce very easily demand for gasoline 50%. And there is a maximum quantity, of course, that you can buy. You cannot fill your car with. So these are the variety of, essentially you have to, if you cannot ration the supply by, ration the demand by price, you need to use some other non-price mechanism. Okay, that's one thing, but you can use other things as well. for example, what is called the cost control. So what is cost control? Now you say, okay, you're selling retail beef. You want to control the price of retail beef. Because you want to protect the standard of living of poor people who don't have enough money to buy beef. You say instead of $3, you can charge only $1.50 per pound. Now, what is the complaint of? What is going to be the first complaint of any retailer who's dealing in beef?
You can't make enough money.
Yeah, I cannot make enough money. I have to pay the cost. I have to pay to the wholesaler the full market price of wholesale meat, and I have to sell at an artificially low price. And then the government can say, aha, okay, I'll take care of you by ordering this guy to charge to you also lower price. He cannot anymore charge the full market price to you. I'm gonna order him also to control the wholesale meat. Now you can easily see what's gonna happen next and how this ends. Then the wholesaler says, but I have to buy from a meat packer product that is at full market price, and you don't allow me to sell it at the full market price. So, okay, I'm gonna control now the meat packer.
Packer?
Meat packer. And then meat packer says, but I have to buy the beef from the butcher at the market price, and you don't allow me to sell it at the full market price. So I'm gonna control now the further downstream, and eventually you end up with a rancher, and rancher doesn't have anyone to kick the can down the road further, nobody to roll over the costs to. You say to rancher, you cannot sell cattle at the price that you used to sell it. You have to be satisfied with 60%, 50%, and so on. So now, what do you think it's likely that the rancher is going to do?
Switch to farming.
Switch to something else. Switch to farming. Switch to growing pigs or sheep or horses, and so on, if he has an opportunity to do it. So now you see this is terribly inefficient, actually. If people have any choice, eventually at the end of any production line, you will have somebody who's going to switch, and there will be no beef on the market. Right? Now you can get clever, and then you say, now I'm going to control the prices of everything that this damn greedy rancher can figure out at all. So I'm going to control the prices of pork, I'm going to control prices of horse meat, I'm going to control prices of farming products, everything. And there will be no way for him to hide from the social obligation to provide services for free to everybody else. What is this? If you are stubborn and consistent enough in this, like a horizontal price control, you control the prices of everything, not only one single production process of this kind, that's kind of vertical price control, but horizontal prices of everything. You end up eventually in full-blown socialism. So what is socialism? Socialism is a system in which the market price system was by and large eliminated. And that's what was what by and large was the case in communist Russia, in China under Mao Zedong, and in some, which is the case in today's North Korea, to some degree probably Cuba.
Venezuela?
Oh, Venezuela, yeah, to some degree as well, but not so much. Venezuela looks more like a fascist autocracy more than a full-blown socialist country. Venezuela is, they may call themselves a socialist country, but they look more like a fascist, like China, communist China is also. So the difference between a communist and a fascist country is that in fascism the socialist central planning is less consistently applied. As communism is much more radical in economic control than fascism. Other than that, there are not much differences. Political sense, you have the concentration camps in China for Muslims. Okay, so if you don't want to do that, you have to try something else. An obvious alternative is to abolish price controls. But if you're really stubborn and want to be clever, you can try something else in addition to complete price control. You can try subsidies. Subsidies to producers. How that works? You give the retail sellers of beef 30% subsidy, whatever, to cover his cost. So he would still be selling at a artificially low price. Price ceiling is still in place. However, you tax everybody else in order to pay the costs to pay the subsidy to the retailer. Here.
Why wouldn't they give the subsidy to like the rancher, like at the beginning of the supply chain?
They can give subsidy to everybody. Here, the effect will be the same. Okay, so you can apply it to every single stage of production. It doesn't matter. The effect will be the same. So now you may think that's a subsidy to the producer. At the surface, it looks like that. But when you look economically, there is one law that you have to bear in mind, that when taxes and subsidies, the incidence of taxes and subsidies, who bears the economic cost of these measures, does not always coincide with who is legally charged with them. So one example of that is, let's say, that you have a firm that has a very inelastic demand, like a monopolistic firm. And they are trading in something that you don't like as a government. And you say, I'm going to impose 50% tax on that. Cigarettes, whatever. Who is going to bear the burden of taxes here?
The people buying it.
The people buying it. Why? Because they cannot switch. If they increase their price, they cannot so easily switch to something else. So what this monopolist is going to do is just going to increase prices and to roll over the costs to consumers. So although in law, who is the subject of taxation? A firm selling cigarettes, whereas in economic reality, who is paying the costs of taxes on customers? Something similar is with subsidies. Here you would be paying, technically, in theory, producer, whoever the producer is, the rancher or the retail beef seller. However, nothing will change from an economic point of view. This seller will have just his costs covered. He will not earn any additional money as compared to the situation without price control. Just the structure of his compensation, the structure of his revenue will change. He will not receive 100% of revenue from consumers, but maybe 70% from consumers and 30% from the government. So essentially what you end up, eventually, you are subsidizing not the producers or sellers of beef, you're subsidizing consumers. Consumers pay a lower price for something. Now the question is, why would vegetarians and people who eat fish and Japanese food or anything else be paying for, why would they be subsidizing the consumers of beef? So that's also not consistent. And finally, what you can do is obviously to abolish all price controls. Okay. So just a few things remained about the minimum wage. We discussed that already. We don't have time to finish it right now. Maybe next time I will say just a few things about the minimum wage. Repeat some of the analysis I think that I already made. Are there any questions? Okay, then have a nice weekend. I think that your homework is already posted. So.